Next week, the UK's highest civil court is going to announce its judgment in an important Scottish case about what the legal definition of a woman is. The case is being brought by the campaign group For Women Scotland, who oppose the Scottish Government's position on gender. Whatever the UK Supreme Court decides, the ruling will have wide-ranging consequences, as our political correspondent Phil Sim explains.
This is the final act in a dispute between the Scottish Government and a women's group that's been going on for years. It started out as a row over a law passed by MSPs in 2018 in a bid to improve gender balance on public sector boards. The group For Women Scotland complained that it included trans people towards those quotas. It went back and forth in the Scottish courts, but it's on a much bigger stage now at the Supreme Court in London, and the stakes are higher too. It's not just about public sector boards anymore. The judgment is going to have implications right across Great Britain. That's because judges are now deciding on the right way to interpret the Equality Act. That's the Westminster anti-discrimination law, which provides protection for people on the basis of things like age and disability, and also sex and gender reassignment. The question is, what does the law mean by sex? For Women Scotland say it should be biological sex. It should mean men and women in what they call the common sense everyday language. The Scottish Government says that actually, if you look at previous law, the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, that says that going through the process of getting a gender recognition certificate counts as a change of sex for all purposes. So, someone with a certificate saying they're a woman would be entitled, under the Equality Act, to protection against discrimination as a woman. And those legal protections are what this is all about. This has been a hugely emotive and controversial debate because it involves groups who feel their very identity is being questioned. Trans people feel that their rights could be rolled back by the judgment. And For Women Scotland say it could end up affecting the running of single-sex services and spaces, everything from women-only hospital wards and prisons to support groups and refuges. As it stands, the Equality Act has an exemption which allows these services to exclude trans people in limited circumstances. But the argument is that a ruling which says they can assert sex-based rights would complicate that. Trans groups dispute this. They say that exemptions could still apply even to people with a gender recognition certificate. This is the kind of argument that hopefully this ruling is going to clear up once and for all. So there will be practical consequences for people and for organisations in terms of how they treat trans people and women. There may be political consequences too. The Scottish Government once championed reforms to make it easier for people to get through the gender recognition process, but those were blocked by UK ministers and seem unlikely to be resurrected. And ultimately there could be questions for the UK Government too. They're the ones responsible for the Equality Act, and this case has already prompted calls for it to be amended so that these definitions can be clarified.
Well, listening to that is Dr. Nick McKerrow, Senior Law Lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian University. So, Nick, do you think that this... Hello, good morning to you. Do you think this UK Supreme Court judgment is going to definitively settle this issue then?
I don't think so, because I think there's broader societal debates on it. In fact, the court in the court session commented that this is a question that has got extremely strong feelings, firm entrenched views on either side, were the words of Lady Dorian. And the courts, and she's explicit in this, and I think it will be the case on Wednesday as well, the courts have said they don't want to enter into policy debates. So i.e. rights and wrongs of the question. What they want to look at is an interpretation of the law as it stands at the moment. So I think whatever way it's decided, that broader policy debate outside of the courts will still go on, and it's whether or not how that court decision goes will determine I think the way that both sides will argue their policy positions.
What do you think are the potential consequences then of whatever the court might rule?
Well, I think if we look at what the position is now, i.e. what the Scottish courts decided and what was appealed by For Women Scotland, what they are essentially saying is that gender recognition certificates does allow the person who on their acquired gender on their GRC to have the protection of the sex of that acquired gender. So it doesn't differentiate, if you like, between sex and gender in the sense of sex being a biological fact and gender being a social construct in society. So it's saying that by gaining the GRC, you've got a prima facie, that's a phrase meaning on the face of it, you've got the rights to protection under sex laws of the acquired sex which you're gaining. Now, opponents of it have argued that there's a distinction distinction between sex and gender. Sex is immutable. You can't change your sex, whatever a certificate says. But the law and the current position isn't that. The Lady Doreen put forward the concept that gender and sex, if you look at all laws through history in the last 20 years and before, sex and gender are quite interchangeable terms. So it's not like that we've had one definition of sex and one definition of gender through all acts of parliament and court cases. They have been looked at in a more fluid way. So that essentially is why the concept of a gender recognition certificate, if one gets it, they do have that protection. Now, it's come from almost a very slight place of law in the sense of it's a very specific thing about representation on public boards. Not that that's not an important issue, but it's quite a small part of the whole gender issue. And the guidance that's given by the Scottish Government about who would be included as female, and that includes women that have gender recognition certificates that say that they're women, they've transitioned to become a woman. Now, that is the guidance that's being challenged. This legal procedure is not an appeal, it's a judicial review. And what judicial review is you're reviewing an order or a decision that a body makes, in this case the Scottish Government. So this judicial review is that the Scottish Government have acted illegally by using that definition. That is to say, the Scottish Government are ascribing the idea that gender recognition certificates gives you sex discrimination protection or sex protection for the acquired sex. And essentially that's the significance of this decision, because not so much about the specific law, but more about what is the definition of a gender recognition certificate and its significance.
And Nick, this has been quite the issue of gender, certainly the wider issue has been very bitter. It's been going on for a long time. And there's been hurt feelings on the other side. And I think maybe one thing the audience are maybe wondering is that we have these sort of high-profile cases. So at the moment, there's this employment tribunal going on involving NHS FIFA about a transgender doctor's right to use a female changing room. So do you think the Supreme Court decision will try to address that kind of issue, or do you think that's a very separate thing?
Well, no, I don't think they'll mention that case, obviously, but I think what they'll look at is this concept, because I think that tribunal case is about single-sex space and a changing room in a workplace. Yeah. And I think one of your previous speakers said that in the law there are exceptions, even with the gender recognition certificate. So even if you've got a gender recognition certificate, there are exceptions in the armed forces, in single-sex spaces, communal provision, and so on. You can make a case, but it has to be proportionate. So the idea is that if you're going to exclude somebody because they've got a gender recognition certificate, you have to have clear reasons why that is proportionate to do so in that context. Now, if somebody doesn't have a gender recognition certificate, but they identify as somebody of a different sex, then that is another issue that hasn't been fully resolved yet, because in the gender recognition laws, they speak about gender being in the process of gender reassignment, of having protection. So you can't be discriminated against because you're a trans person. But the question is, would it be discrimination against a trans person to exclude them from places, single-sex spaces, if it's not a proportionate argument? So it's a complex argument that won't be settled on Wednesday. But I think what will be clearer perhaps is the position of GRCs, gender recognition certificates, and the protection they give. Because, as you said, the views are so entrenched either side, I don't think that will resolve it. And one of the battlegrounds that will still continue, I think, will be the people that don't have gender recognition certificates. And there's obviously a debate about that, because the law, which the Scottish Government proposed and was backed by other politicians, was that it should be a bit more straightforward to get a gender recognition certificate. That was the idea of self-identification and so on, which the Gender Recognition Reform Bill was going to do. But that was blocked by the UK government, because essentially, if you think about it, if you make it easier to get a GRC from perspective of somebody that doesn't believe that sex can change, if you make it easier, then that does have an effect, because it could be challenging these positions. So sadly, I don't think this is going to end the sharpness of the debate in society. I don't think there isn't a ruling that's going to satisfy either side, I think, completely, but it will perhaps give us more clarity on the position of sex versus gender in the law, that the law the Equality Act does recognise the possibility of sex being acquired by someone through gender reassignment, and that sex is not immutable and cannot change from your biological sex.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nick, for talking us through all those